My friends, this is Scarlet Veil, and today I'm telling you a story so absurd, so gloriously unprofessional, that it sounds like satire written by a bored intern with a vendetta. A data analyst got hired to work with numbers, deadlines, reports, projections, dashboards, and the sort of soul-draining spreadsheets that make a person question capitalism before lunch. But somewhere between quarterly targets and performance reviews, his manager decided that what the office really needed was not sharper analytics. No. What the office needed was a grown adult employee who would scrub grass stains out of khakis and treat silk blouses like they were sacred relics from a dynasty of delusion. And when he refused, fired. On the spot. Because apparently some managers don't want staff. They want servants with email access. Welcome to the channel, Lying Whispers. I'm Scarlet Veil, your favorite slightly dangerous confidant, and tonight we are opening a story that smells like detergent, entitlement, and the kind of corporate arrogance that deserves its own parking ticket. This is one of those internet confessions that land somewhere between AITA, labor law horror, and upper management cosplay as feudal nobility. And let me tell you, my friends, this one has everything: fake professionalism, weaponized team spirit, HR gymnastics, passive-aggressive smiles, a termination meeting that escalated faster than a group chat after someone types "we need to talk," and one exhausted employee who finally realized that his paycheck was not, in fact, a subscription to humiliation. So before we go deeper into this beautifully pressed nightmare, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this story with that friend who has definitely whispered, "I swear my boss has lost touch with reality," during a lunch break. Stay with me until the end, because the fallout is wild. The manager gets exactly as dramatic as you think he would, and the final question hanging over this entire mess is the one nobody in leadership ever wants answered out loud: is a salary still worth it when the job starts demanding your dignity as a weekly add-on service?
Andy, please, pegue café ou a bebida de sua preferência e acompanhe essa história absurda comigo.
The story began, as these stories so often do, with a job posting that sounded normal. Respectable, even. The employee at the center of this train wreck was called Evan in the post, though let us all agree that was not his real name, because the internet may love chaos, but Scarlet loves anonymization. Evan was in his late 20s, sharp, organized, the kind of man who color-coded folders for fun, and had somehow convinced himself that a stable analyst role in a mid-sized corporate firm would be a mature next step. He had survived contract work, unstable gigs, recruiters who described toxic workplaces as fast-paced, and interviews where executives said things like, "We're a family here," with the exact same energy one uses to announce a curse. Still, the offer looked solid. Decent salary, health insurance, predictable hours, allegedly. A title that sounded polished enough to make his parents stop asking when he planned to get a real career.
So he took the job.
At first, it even seemed promising. The office sat in one of those glass buildings designed to look visionary from the outside and spiritually fluorescent on the inside. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and ambition. Everyone dressed in that polished, urban, unbothered aesthetic that says, "I answer emails at midnight," but in tasteful loafers. Evan's team handled internal performance reporting, client metrics, forecasting, and operational efficiency reviews. It was dry work, yes, but important. He liked structure. He liked solving problems. He liked that numbers, unlike people, usually behaved when handled correctly. And then there was the manager. Of course there was a manager. His name in the story was Grant, and honestly, my friends, Grant is the perfect name for a man who mistakes authority for nobility. Grant had that curated executive casual look that only exists in offices where men believe rolled sleeves are a personality trait. He wore cologne too expensive to smell sincere, smiled with all the warmth of a locked conference room, and spoke in that rehearsed motivational tone managers use when they want credit for other people's effort. In the first few weeks, Grant seemed merely demanding. Not unusual. He leaned hard on phrases like ownership mindset, doing what it takes, and that classic manipulative little gem, "I really value flexibility on my team." Now, my friends, whenever a manager says flexibility, what he often means is, "I would like the laws of space, time, and human decency not to apply to me." That phrase is a red flag in a tailored blazer. Still, Evan tolerated him, because that is what ambitious employees do in the early months. They make excuses. Maybe he is stressed. Maybe this is temporary. Maybe the culture is just intense. Maybe the weirdness has a ceiling. Spoiler alert, it did not. At first, the boundary crossing came disguised as small favors. Could Evan stay 10 minutes late to format a deck? Could he print something urgent that had somehow become urgent only because Grant forgot about it for 3 days? Could he pick up lunch during a break because Grant was stuck on a call? Nothing impossible. Nothing individually shocking. That is how creeping entitlement works. It never arrives wearing a villain cape. It enters softly, smiling, carrying a coffee, asking for just one tiny thing. Then another. Then another. It stretches itself over the line until the line becomes a rumor. Evan noticed the pattern, but he also noticed the office rewarded compliance. The employees who smiled through nonsense got praised as reliable. The ones who questioned anything became not collaborative.
Ah, yes.
Corporate dialect, where collaborative means obedient, resilient means undersupported, and culture fit sometimes means willing to let a manager rearrange your humanity into a convenience package. One Friday afternoon, about 2 months into the job, the first truly bizarre thing happened. Grant walked past Evan's desk holding a reusable grocery bag. Not a briefcase. Not files. Not documents. A grocery bag. He dropped it on Evan's desk like a king tossing scraps to a servant in a badly written period drama. Evan looked up. Grant smiled.
Need a favor, he said.
Now, my sweet little chaos scholars, anytime a manager says need a favor while standing over your workstation, it is never a favor. It is a test. A loyalty audition. A psychological experiment conducted by someone with access to your payroll. Evan opened the bag. Inside were clothes. Dirty clothes. A pair of khaki pants with grass stains along the knees. 2 silk blouses. A gym shirt.
Socks.
Let that settle in. This man hired an analyst and delivered laundry like he was outsourcing his domestic life to whoever sat closest to the printer. Evan thought it had to be a joke. A weird joke. A tasteless joke. The kind of joke someone makes before saying, "Relax, I'm kidding." But Grant did not laugh. Instead, he explained casually that he was swamped, had a lot on his plate, and needed someone detail-oriented to take care of it. He mentioned a cleaner near the office. He said the silk needed special treatment. He said the grass stains on the khakis had to be pretreated first. Pretreated? My friends, the audacity was not merely standing in the room. The audacity had rented it, redecorated it, and asked for sparkling water. Evans stared at him. Grant kept talking. He framed it as support.
As trust.
As being a team player. There it was. The favorite phrase of every person trying to sneak exploitation through the side door, wearing business casual. Team player. A phrase so abused it should qualify for witness protection. Evan asked the obvious question. Why would I handle your personal laundry? Grant blinked like the question itself was rude. Because, in his mind, the insult was not the request. The insult was resistance. He smiled again, thinner this time, and said everyone pitched in around here. He reminded Evan that leadership noticed attitude. He said this was the kind of thing that separated employees who merely did the minimum from employees who were trusted. He even added, with the confidence of a man who had never been told to sit down in his life, that he would reimburse the cleaning cost. Reimburse. As if the real issue was detergent. As if dignity had a receipt. Evan refused politely the first time. He said he was not comfortable handling personal errands unrelated to his role. Grant's expression shifted, but only slightly. Enough for Evan to see it. That tiny crack in the polished face of managerial charm. That little shiver of outrage some entitled people feel when they discover another human being has independent thought. Grant lifted the bag himself and said, "Let's revisit this later." And oh, they revisited it. The following week, it happened again. Another bag. Another drop. Another request dressed as an expectation. This time, Grant left the bag by Evan's chair before the morning meeting, as if the matter had already been settled in some imaginary kingdom where job descriptions were decorative and labor boundaries were optional. Evan returned the bag to Grant's office. Quietly. Professionally. No scene. No speech. Just a clean, deliberate boundary. And that, my friends, was apparently the corporate equivalent of slapping a crown off a tyrant. From that day on, the atmosphere changed. Grant became cold. Emails turned clipped. Feedback became nitpicky. Minor errors that previously went unmentioned suddenly received full dramatic treatment. A formatting choice became a concern about attention to detail. A missed comma turned into questions about consistency. A scheduling misunderstanding became an indicator of limited adaptability. Limited adaptability. The man had not agreed to become the laundress of House Delusion, and now they were writing performance fiction about it. Evan started documenting everything. Thank heaven. Because when leadership starts acting strange after a boundary is set, documentation becomes less of a habit and more of a survival kit. He kept emails. He wrote down dates. He summarized conversations after they happened. He saved chat messages. He took photos when Grant left laundry near his workstation. And yes, Grant kept doing it. That is the most staggering part. He was not embarrassed. He was offended that his command had not been obeyed. He treated refusal not as a legitimate professional boundary, but as a challenge to his power. That is the psychology at the center of so many toxic workplaces. The specific task is almost irrelevant. It could be laundry, coffee, dog sitting, picking up dry cleaning, watching someone's children during a quick emergency, editing a spouse's resume, or booking a family vacation under the label of calendar support. The task is not the point. The point is submission. Grant wanted proof that Evan would fold, and Evan did not. Weeks passed. Then came the breaking point. It was a Thursday late afternoon, the kind of gray office day, where everyone looked half-dissolved under artificial lighting. Evan had spent the morning fixing a broken reporting model, one that had real consequences for client-facing summaries. He had skipped lunch, answered 3 urgent emails that were not urgent, and was trying to finalize a forecast packet before end of day. Grant appeared beside his desk. Again, bag in hand. Honestly, if I had been there, I would have screamed. Not professionally. Not spiritually. Just loud enough to summon the entire legal department. Grant set the bag down and said, I need this done before Monday. The khakis are especially bad. Not hello. Not are you free. Not could you help. Just a royal decree from Lord Linen of the petty kingdom of management abuse. This time, Evan did not soften the refusal. He looked directly at Grant and said, calm as winter, that he was not hired to do personal domestic tasks, he would not be handling anyone's laundry, and he needed Grant to stop asking. There it was. The hard no. No apology folded into it. No nervous laugh to make it easier for the person doing the exploiting. Just clarity. My friends, toxic authority can survive criticism. It can survive quiet resentment. But nothing destabilizes it like a plane. Self-possessed no delivered, without trembling. Grant froze. For a second, the office seemed to hold its breath. Then came the disbelief. You're refusing a direct request from your manager? Notice the wording. Not an inappropriate request. Not a personal errand. A direct request. As though managerial authority magically transformed dirty laundry into a legitimate business function. By that logic, if he had handed over a casserole dish and a list of his children's allergies, would that also count as leadership? Evans said yes. He was refusing. Because it was inappropriate. Because it was unrelated to his job. Because it needed to stop. Grant's face reddened. He lowered his voice, that dangerous, controlled tone some people use when they are furious but still performing composure for the room. He said Evan was being insubordinate. He said he was showing a shocking lack of team commitment. He said people who wanted to succeed knew when to go above and beyond. Above and beyond? Sir. Above and beyond is staying late to help meet a deadline. It is not hand-washing your manager's silk blouse like a disgraced extra in an aristocratic fever dream. Evan repeated himself. No. Grant grabbed the bag, turned, and marched to HR. And then the machine moved. Fast. Within maybe 20 minutes, Evan got a message asking him to come to a conference room. The conference room. Of course. No place on earth has absorbed more fake concern than a corporate conference room. Frosted glass. Dry air. One sad speakerphone in the middle of the table. A box of tissues present like an omen. Inside sat Grant, an HR representative named Melissa, and another senior manager who looked like he wished he had chosen dentistry instead of executive leadership. Melissa wore the careful face of someone trying to appear neutral while clearly operating inside a script. She thanked Evan for coming. She said there had been a serious breakdown in alignment regarding expectations. Translation: the employee had refused to play domestic help, and management wanted that phrased in a way that sounded less medieval. Grant claimed Evan had become hostile. Hostile. The man who had said no to washing another grown man's stained khakis was now hostile. Evan, thankfully, did not panic. He asked whether the meeting concerned his refusal to perform a personal task unrelated to his role. Silence. Tiny, delicious silence. Melissa tried to redirect. She said the issue was broader than a single moment. Broader. Yes, broader in the way an avalanche is broader than the snowflake that starts it. Grant said Evan had demonstrated a pattern of resistance. Again, dramatic language. Resistance. Not boundary setting. Resistance. He made it sound like Evan was leading a rebellion in the copy room. Evan then did something very smart. He said he wanted clarity, on record, regarding whether he was being disciplined for refusing to handle his manager's personal laundry. My friends, the room practically swallowed its own tongue. Melissa shifted. The senior manager looked down. Grant said that phrasing was inflammatory. Inflammatory?
No, darling.
Accurate. And accuracy is often inflammatory to liars. The conversation spiraled. Melissa repeated that the company expected professionalism and flexibility. Evan replied that professionalism did not include domestic servitude. Grant said he was disappointed in Evan's tone. That is another classic move. When exploitative people lose the argument, they critique the tone used to expose the exploitation. Suddenly, the real issue is not the abuse. It is that the abused person did not sound sufficiently cheerful while declining it. Within the hour, they terminated him. Just like that. Badge surrendered. Laptop collected. Access cut. A cardboard box for personal belongings, because corporate theater loves props. Melissa called it a separation. I call it what it was: retaliation wrapped in policy language. Evan walked out of the building less than 60 minutes after refusing to do laundry. Imagine it. You arrive as an analyst. You leave as the cautionary tale everyone whispers about near the elevators. And here is the most revealing part of all. Several coworkers messaged him later. Privately. Not one in the meeting. Not one loudly. Privately, of course, because workplaces full of fear produce whisper networks, not justice. They told him Grant had asked others for inappropriate errands before. Returning gifts. Picking up dinner. Dropping off packages. Waiting for delivery appointments at his apartment. One person even hinted that a former assistant had once been expected to organize his home closet under the excuse that he trusted her sense of structure. Of course he did. Tyrants always call it trust when they mean unpaid labor. The laundry request had not been random. It was escalation. A loyalty test. A litmus test for whether Evan would let the boundary dissolve completely. And because he refused, he became a problem that needed removing. Now let us pause here, my friends, because this is where the story shifts from outrageous to painfully familiar. How many workplaces hide exploitation behind polished language? How often does pitching in become code for accept what would be unacceptable anywhere else? How many employees are pressured into gray area nonsense because they are scared, underpaid, exhausted, or simply trying to survive in an economy where stability feels like a luxury item? That is the cruel part. Evan did not refuse in a vacuum. He refused in the year 2026 in a labor market full of instability, layoffs, rising costs, and that particular modern terror of knowing one lost paycheck can turn your entire month into a financial horror film. He had rent, bills, student debt, groceries that somehow cost more every week. Refusing was not glamorous.
It was terrifying.
And still he refused. Because at some point, a person realizes that degrading treatment does not become acceptable just because it arrives with benefits enrollment and branded office mugs.
Se você chegou até aqui, apoie com like because this is exactly where the emotional knife twists.
The internet loves a triumphant, and then he stood up for himself moment. But real life is messier. After Evan got home, the adrenaline crashed.
He was angry, yes.
But he was also scared. There is a special kind of silence in an apartment after an abrupt firing. The kind where the refrigerator hum sounds accusatory and every room suddenly feels too still. He sat at his kitchen table staring at the termination paperwork, trying to process the surreal fact that his career had just been derailed by a man who apparently believed Office Depot and Downton Abbey were the same workplace model. That first night, he barely slept. He replayed everything. Could he have handled it differently? Should he have laughed it off longer? Should he have pretended to comply while job hunting quietly? That is how coercive systems linger in the mind. Even when the wrongdoing is obvious, the victim still audits himself. He wonders whether survival required a little more bending, a little more silence, a little more self-erasure. But by morning, anger sharpened into clarity. He looked through the records he had saved. Photos of the bags, messages implying helpful support, calendar notes, emails sent after each refusal that suddenly questioned his attitude. The timeline told a story. A very ugly story.
And that story mattered.
So Evan filed a complaint with the labor board. He also consulted an employment attorney who apparently had the exact reaction any sane person would have, a long pause followed by something close to "he asked you to do what?" Beautiful. The legal reality, of course, was not simple. Retaliation cases rarely come gift-wrapped in confession letters. Employers cloak themselves in performance language. They build paper trails after the fact. They rely on ambiguity. They count on employees being too broke, tired, or ashamed to push back. It is a system designed to make the ridiculous feel hard to prove. But the laundry mattered because it was specific. Specificity ruins bad liars. General mistreatment is easier to blur. A grocery bag full of dirty personal clothing dropped on an analyst's desk every week? That sticks. That sounds as insane in a formal complaint as it does over coffee. Which, frankly, is refreshing. Evan gathered witness statements where he could. He preserved everything. He wrote a full chronology while memories were fresh. And he learned something brutal but liberating: when toxic power loses access to your obedience, it often exposes itself in the rush to punish you. The company, meanwhile, tried to contain the narrative. Former coworkers said management described the termination as an issue of professionalism and performance alignment. Ah yes, corporate euphemism, that fine art of using 12 polished words to hide one ugly truth. They did not say, "We fired him because he would not wash his manager's clothes," because even they knew that sentence smelled legally hazardous. So they dressed it up. But employees talk. Always. Break rooms have better intelligence networks than executive suites ever realize. People compared notes. People remembered odd requests. People connected patterns. And Grant, whose authority once seemed slick and invincible, started to look less like a strong leader and more like a deeply embarrassing little emperor stomping around an office because nobody wanted to starch his pants. As for Evan, the next few weeks were rough. Let us not romanticize it. Dignity feels noble in principle and expensive in practice. He updated his resume. He cut unnecessary spending. He stared at his bank account more than any human being should. He applied for jobs until the process itself felt like emotional wallpaper. And yet, under all the anxiety, something inside him loosened. The dread that had followed him each workday began to fade. No more flinching when a notification popped up from Grant. No more wondering what bizarre favor would appear next. No more calculating how much humiliation he needed to absorb to remain easy to work with. That freedom did not pay immediately, but it was real. Mental health is not an abstract luxury. It is the difference between waking up braced for degradation and waking up with your nervous system still your own. And here is where Scarlett has to ask the question, my friends, what exactly is the corporate ladder worth if the rungs are made of submission? What kind of success asks you to shrink yourself into utility? What kind of manager needs proof of loyalty in the form of laundered silk? Because that is what this really was. Not laundry. Hierarchy theater. Grant wanted confirmation that his title could reach beyond work and into personhood. He wanted his convenience to outrank Evan's boundaries. He wanted domestic compliance in exchange for professional survival. And when that failed, he reached for the oldest trick in the toxic workplace: manual punishment disguised as policy. There is a reason stories like this explode online. They sound absurd, yes, but they also feel familiar. Maybe not everyone has been asked to wash a manager's clothes. Let us all be grateful civilization still clings to a few standards. But so many people have been pushed into weird, intimate, inappropriate labor under the excuse of teamwork. Can you pick up my child? Can you sign for my package? Can you clean up after my pet in the office? Can you plan my anniversary dinner? Can you come by on Saturday to help me move some furniture? Can you just do this one thing that has absolutely nothing to do with your role, because saying no would reveal that my authority has limits? That is the tension. Not every illegal demand arrives with flashing lights. Some come smiling. Some come casually. Some are wrapped in praise and framed as opportunity. And that is why boundaries matter before the request gets outrageous. Because once a manager learns you will bend, they stop wondering where the limit is. They assume there is none. Eventually, Evan shared his story online, anonymously. Where else does modern grief go but the internet, dressed in throwaway names and righteous punctuation? He posted it in the style of AITA, though the real question was less, am I the problem? And more, has corporate culture finally fallen through the floor? The response was immediate. Thousands of strangers, horrified and energized, poured in with reactions ranging from disbelief to legal advice to very creative insults about Grant that I cannot repeat without giving the algorithm heart palpitations.
Some called it fake.
Naturally. The internet thinks anything too outrageous to survive must be fiction, which says more about how badly we want the world to make sense than about whether it does. But others recognize the pattern instantly. Executive assistants, former interns, office coordinators, employees from hospitality, tech, finance, healthcare, people who had once been asked to do personal errands under professional titles, people who had smiled through it, people who had refused and paid for it, people who wished they had said no sooner. That response mattered almost as much as the legal complaint, because shame thrives in isolation. Exploitative systems depend on each person believing their experience is too strange, too petty, too hard to explain. The moment the stories connect, the spell weakens. And Grant's behavior, stripped of office polish, became exactly what it was: pathetic. Not powerful. Pathetic. A grown man so inflated by title that he mistook employment for ownership. Now, from a practical standpoint, Evan also learned some hard lessons he wished someone had told him earlier. First, document early. Not when things explode. Before. The first weird request, the first strange message, the first time a manager tries to blur the boundary between professional duty and personal convenience. Dates matter. Wording matters. Patterns matter. Second, never rely on HR to be your friend. Let us all release that fantasy with love. HR may contain kind individuals. It may sometimes help. But structurally, it exists to manage risk for the company. And in moments like this, you are not walking into a sanctuary. You are walking into strategy. Third, if something feels degrading, do not let polished language gaslight you into calling it normal. Support. Flexibility. Ownership. Going above and beyond. These phrases are not inherently evil, but in the hands of entitled leadership, they become designer wrapping paper on a box full of nonsense. Fourth, your instinct is allowed to matter. Evan knew the request was wrong before he could fully articulate why. That discomfort was information. Valuable information. Sometimes we are taught to distrust our own reaction if nobody else is openly objecting. But silence does not make abuse legitimate. It just makes it quieter. As the labor complaint moved forward, the company's tone reportedly shifted. Shocking, I know. Once lawyers and formal agencies enter the chat, even the most arrogant organizations suddenly rediscover nuance. Communication became more careful. Statements became narrower. Certain people who had been very bold in private became very vague in writing. Funny how that happens. The case was still ongoing when the post was written, so there was no dramatic courtroom finale yet. No judge slamming a gavel. No slow clap in the hallway. No orchestral vindication. Real justice is rarely that cinematic. But even without a final ruling, something important had already happened. Evan had reclaimed the story. He stopped letting management define the event as attitude failure. He named it for what it was: retaliation after refusing an inappropriate personal task. And naming matters. Because once the truth is said plainly, the spell of euphemism weakens. Months later, Evan found another job. Better pay, stronger boundaries. A manager who, by all available evidence, handled his own laundry like the independent adult he claimed to be. Imagine that.
Progress.
The experience did not leave him untouched. Of course not. Humiliation attempted and punishment delivered will mark a person. He became more cautious, more observant, quicker to notice language that disguised control as culture.
But he also became more solid.
The kind of solid that comes from surviving a moment where fear said bend and self-respect said no. And perhaps that is the ugliest truth for managers like Grant. The employee they try to break often leaves with something stronger than compliance: perspective. Because once you have been fired over a bag of dirty khakis and a silk blouse crisis worthy of a bored socialite villain, a lot of workplace intimidation loses its magic. You start recognizing petty power for what it is.
Small, desperate,
loud but small. So was dignity worth the paycheck? In the immediate aftermath, that question hurt. Rent does not get paid in moral clarity. Groceries do not appear because you upheld a boundary. Fear is real. Loss is real. But long-term? Evan would say yes. Because the paycheck came attached to a slow erosion of self. And there is no salary generous enough to make degradation feel healthy forever. He had not been climbing a ladder. He had been standing on a trapdoor disguised as opportunity. And once it opened beneath him, he finally saw the structure for what it was. So now I bring it to you, my friends, because this is where the gossip ends and the judgment begins. Was he wrong to refuse immediately, knowing the economy was brutal? Should he have played along while planning an exit? At what point does being practical become volunteering for your own dehumanization? And how many people are still in offices right now smiling through requests that would sound unhinged if spoken out loud to anyone outside the building? Tell me honestly, if your manager dropped a bag of grass-stained khakis and silk blouses on your desk and called it teamwork, would you laugh, quit, report them, or wash the clothes while plotting a revenge email so elegant it deserved museum lighting? Would you call this AITA territory, labor board territory, or full-blown we have lost the plot as a society territory? Because in the end, Grant kept his title for a while, the company kept its language polished, HR kept its face professionally blank, and Evan walked out with a box under his arm and panic in his chest. But one of them left with his dignity intact, and the other still needed someone else to rinse his grass stains. That, my friends, is the kind of irony even Gossip Girl would sip slowly. Comment below, my friends, I need to know what you would do in this situation.